welcome to The Conduit.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's a delight and an honor to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I have pored through this book, and in some ways, I think it's a deeply personal story, as any of you who have read it or will read it will see. You care for your son, you've cared for your mother, you've cared for your grandmother. In some ways, through your constituency work and through your policy work, you have cared for the country. At the same time, your father died when you were 4, your mother when you were 15. You were raised by your grandmother. So you've been both a giver of care and a receiver of care. And so care is really something deeply personal to you. So I'd like to ask you to kick off why you care.
Well, on one level, that's been my life, so it's what I've done. But one of the purpose of writing the book was, first of all, to make sure care was part of the debate, because it often is overlooked and it's all too difficult. But from my perspective, I wanted to show both the challenges of care, but also the joys of care. When you are caring for someone you love, you develop a relationship which is very different. And obviously, everyone's case is personal to them. But if I take my mother, for example, I was very close to my mum, obviously, having lost my dad, and she was an amazing mum. And then when she was ill, I would, come back from school, I'd lay on her bed, and we'd chat, and we'd watch TV for hours. And I probably had a closer relationship with my mum than most teenage boys, I guess. And the excitement of having a remote control colour TV in her bedroom was just beyond anything. And then my little boy, who my wife and I care for with support, he has an undiagnosed neurological condition. He can't walk well and can't talk properly, and has learning difficulties. But the relationship we have with each other, it's just such fun. And we laugh a lot, and it may be about his naughty parrot, it may be about the bad boy Henry the Hoover, it may be mad stuff, but we have a great relationship. And because I think care needs to be elevated and valued more, while I do talk about the poo and the pee in the book, I want to get over the fact that a good caring relationships can be fantastic.
So, having listened to your convention speech, and having listened to the deeply intimate personal stories of care that we're going to return to, I sort of came away of thinking that care can be something that's powerfully political, because it's about generosity and reciprocity. It's about what we owe each other. And the Conduit, one of our founding principles is this idea of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And it says that we are better, kinder, more generous, more resilient as a society when we affirm our obligations to each other. But it can also sort of devolve into something a bit sentimental and not be something that can be robustly defended. So I wanted to kind of ask you, in a world where hate transmits quicker than kindness and where virality can bring out the worst in us, not the best in us, how care can be defended politically in a way that really makes a difference, because it seems to me that we risk neglecting care, and we don't fund it properly and we don't reward it because we've neglected the politics of care, not just the personal parts of care.
Oh, there's many dimensions to an answer to that. I mean, first of all, the people who are peddling the hate, what they really can't work out is if you either use humour back to them or use good values back to them. They want us to have a fight with them, and actually sometimes not doing that really spooks them. So it's not a bad thing to do. The other thing in terms of can you stand up for it, there's no doubt that, if I get policy geeky for a minute, that the Treasury and others in politics have always thought that doing something about care is very expensive. And I think it's the reverse is the case. Yeah, upfront costs, you've got to change things, but if we had a health and care system that started with the family and the individual person who needs the care and the people who love them, who want to give that care, and they support them, it's actually not just better for those people, but it takes the pressure off the health service, makes social care reform feasible, and suddenly the health and care system is working for individuals at a way that's completely affordable and has better outcomes. And then you have the knock-on effect to the economy. I mean, there are about, the estimates vary, but let's say it's about 7 to 8 million family carers in the UK. Not all of them would be able to work by any stretch of the imagination. But with 600 people giving up their work every day to care for someone, there's an economic issue there as well. And so I strongly believe we get care right, yes, we actually rescue and save the NHS, but we have a big boost to the economy. And when you then get even more sort of vision, you think about the future with AI and the sort of world we're going to live in 10, 20, 30 years' time. I'm not the first person to make this observation, but clearly we're moving to a society that would be even more high-tech, and the human side of that is high-touch. High-tech, high-touch. And therefore, whichever dimension you look at, trying to be a backer and an advocate for care, I think it works, whether you're sort of a treasury economist and you actually need to understand what care really involves, or whether you're someone who is trying to take on Mr. Farage.
So you make the point in your book on a number of occasions that you get incredibly animated and sort of angry. You can see it jumping off the page when you kind of confront a kind of idiomatic treasury person who doesn't get it and who is stuck in short-termism, and you keep saying we need a more long-term approach to thinking about care, and we'll start digging into what that means and what that looks like. The short-term problem that the UK is confronting, and I don't mean to kind of devolve down into numbers, I just want to think about how you get from short-termism to long-termism here, is when you reduce productivity projections by 0.1%, you wipe out £9 billion of fiscal headroom, and the government is stuck, or perhaps all governments are going to be stuck in this incredible bind of being attentive to bond markets and trying to manage pennies. And it's an incredibly unpropitious environment to make long-term, thoughtful investments of this particular kind. In the book, you talk a little bit about how the analogies in your former work in climate change of how to think about contracts for difference, and how offshore wind might be, markets might be created, and how that might read across to care. And then you throw your hands up and go, it's actually complex. So tell us a little bit about how we make the case for penny pinching people who are worried about bond markets. How do we actually persuade them to make the necessary investments in care?
Well, there's, again, several ways of doing that. I had a chat to Andrew Dilnot, who came up with the Dilnot Commission and who's been trying to get action on social care and care for some time from a very authoritative basis. And he says the problem is there are three people who make the decision, the Chancellor, the Secretary of State for Health and Care, and the Prime Minister. Unless the Prime Minister is prepared to stand up to the Chancellor, you won't make it happen. So you need, in our politics, the way our system works, you need to make this happen, that political leadership. But they then have to be, I guess, reassured that the numbers would work in the harsh world that you're talking about. Unless you confront, I think, the Treasury with the, I wouldn't say product, but the greater efficiency of supporting care. And let me just give you a few basic examples. This is well known, and it's why I'm mystified that people haven't gone down this route before, because it's so blooming obvious. A bed in the hospital costs at least 3 times the cost of a bed in a care home, and multiply more times the cost of a care at home. So clearly, if you can keep people at home or in a care home rather than going to hospital, or you can get them out more quickly, you save a lot of money. Now, it's also, by the way, better for that individual, which is obviously another test. But if you're thinking for the Treasury, you save a lot of money. And our systems just haven't been geared up for that. There's lots of experiments and innovation in this space, by the way. It's not like no one's tried stuff. But the deployment of it is just ludicrously slow and poor. Let me give you one example. There's an innovation in the health service at the moment called virtual wards, where people go home or go to a care home, but their bedroom is seen as a ward. And through telemedicine and through linking with the family or the care home staff, the doctors and consultants keep in regular touch and are monitoring, and pieces of equipment can help that. Now that is obviously massively efficient. Improving the care, improve the health outcomes, but it's happening at a tiny level at the moment. We could massively expand that. So that's what I say to the Treasury when I was basically telling them they were wrong about offshore wind, that the cost could come down. They were wrong, we were right. We got the cost down in 7 years using private sector innovation and competition. And offshore wind electricity is cheaper than fossil fuel electricity. The Treasury would never have believed that. They don't understand, just don't believe that things can be made more productive, that things can be more efficient. They take the status quo and assume that forward. I mean, how stupid is that? So you have to have strong politicians who are going to call this really narrow thinking out.
So the book has, I mean, for those of you who haven't read the book, there's 3 chapters in which you talk about the different forms of caring that you've either received or given, and then 4 essays of conversations between carers and the people they care for. And what it does is it gives a very deeply personal and intimate account of the incredible complexity involved in caring for people. Give me offshore wind any day, frankly, because it's just a much thornier, more difficult problem, right? And you said, when in the back parts of your book, said 3 very thorny and difficult problems that are both costly but difficult to deliver is children and young people with special needs and disabilities, how we give them proper care, how we provide working age adults with learning disabilities assistance, and how we deal with mental health challenges in the population at large. And those are just 3 variations of all the other complexities. And then you throw onto that a kind of unnerving statistic that 13% of domestic homicides are committed by carers. And so you sense that that comes from a place where people experience anger and anguish and are not properly rewarded and not properly supported. So the complexity in trying to deliver this system is just, my head was spinning by the end of it. But then you talk about innovation, and you talked about some solutions, some of them in your own constituency with these remarkable social enterprises that deliver really quality care. And I wonder if you might give that as a few examples of those organizations.
Yeah, so the one I particularly quote in the book, or there's one of several, but the one that comes to mind is Kingston Carers Network. So it's a voluntary organisation. It gets some funding from Kingston Council and from grants and various other sources, a little bit of user income. And it supports carers in the Royal Borough of Kingston, which is where my constituency is. And they may be young carers, they may be carers of parent carers, they may be people looking after someone whose their partner or loved one has dementia. And the example I'd give is with dementia, because that's obviously a massive issue in our society. And they came up with the idea, it's really, really expensive, of a WhatsApp group. And they realized that dementia carers can be quite lonely and isolated, and their mental health can deteriorate. And they said, well, why don't we put them in touch with each other? And then they started sharing information about where to get services, how to fill in forms, what they're entitled to, what groups were out there. But then they started making sort of friendships, and they go for a cup of coffee, or they go for a meal. And they were with people who they knew were like them. And they weren't actually talking about being a dementia carer, but they just knew that they were with people who knew them. And it was incredibly successful. It is successful, continues. But my point in the book is that just imagine what that really means in pounds, shilling and pence. What it means is that the person who's looking after a loved one is able to sustain that relationship and that care for longer than they otherwise would have been able to. Let's say on average it's 3 months longer. What does that mean in pound shilling? It means 3 months less in a care home, which of course is vastly more expensive than caring for someone at home. And you put that in many other scenarios. If you actually think about supporting people properly to do what they want to do. Now, not everyone is going to want to look after the loved one. I accept that. So some people won't have loved ones to look after them. So it's not the only model. But actually, the vast majority of people have someone who cares about them deeply, who wants to help them. And if we support them just a little bit more, not just with a WhatsApp group, maybe an adaptation in their property, you know, a disabled toilet, for example, or train them to deliver very basic medical care, maybe some injection or something like that. Give them a bit of respite care so they get a break, so they can get themselves together and have a life and feel, you know, that they can work. Help them to manage employment and caring better if that's what they're able to do. You know, these really simple things don't cost very much, but can dramatically impact the health of the person being cared for and the overall cost of society. And, you know, I'm sure I would be challenged by some people saying, "Oh, it's that you make it sound too easy, Ed." But actually, there is a free lunch to be had there. You can improve things and save money. So why aren't people doing it?
So I want to jump onto this because the book really draws out this concept of unpaid work that happens in homes, in intimate settings between people. And some of the statistics are kind of absolutely astonishing. As you said, you know, anywhere between, on the low side, 5.7 million to the high side of 9 million people in this country provide this unpaid assistance. There are 100,000 vacancies in social care. 40% of people say they've given up work entirely to support somebody. And if you add it all up, somebody said that it's 162 billion pounds of free care given through this mechanism. It's like a second NHS, as you say in the book, right? So there's this shadow voluntary kindness economy that's uncompensated for. And then what we do is we pay these home carers, and I literally had to take off my glasses and rub my eyes, £83.30, now gone up a little bit, for 35 hours a week work, yeah, for the carers allowance. They may be doing a lot more than that. They may be doing a lot more than that.
They have to do at least 35 to get that benefit.
Yes.
But it's the same however many hours they work.
Right.
They've got to do 35.
And it's gone up, you know, the current government's put it up a little, but even if you doubled that, £83 a week for people who work 35 hours at least at home is just, there's something just bizarre about that. But the flip side of that is, given that volume of work, to start properly compensating people in that space would save you money in the long term, but would cost you a lot of money in the short term. So how do we square that circle?
That's a very fair point. And I'm not arguing for a massive increase in the carers allowance. I think this does need to be increased a bit. But there's other ways of looking at the problem with the carers allowance. There's a limit on what you can earn in addition. And you start getting it withdrawn. And the Guardians cover the scandal of overpayments, because essentially, if you earn £1 a week more than you're supposed to under this earnings limit, you lose the whole benefit, not just £1 of it, but you lose all of it. And you'd be shocked to know that carers sometimes don't quite know exactly what's happening week to week, and sometimes their salary goes a little bit above, and they may not have realised that. And because of that, the DWP in its glory has been going after tens of thousands of carers, low-income people, saying, we overpaid you because 5 years ago, in these months, you earned slightly more than the earnings limit. So they are literally spending lots of money chasing people who haven't got a lot of money for quite large amounts of money, because the system is bonkers. So, you know, you can reform that, and you almost overnight make a big difference for carers, because they can keep the carers allowance and earn a little bit more. And I would go quite far in changing that structure, because you've got some people who have come out of the workforce and could earn huge amounts of money, but want to look after their husband or their wife or their son or their daughter. But they could probably do 15 hours work a week, online at home, and some of these people could earn a lot of money. But, they're not allowed to. So the perverse incentive, we actually had created a system which incentivized people not to work. So, and because things are complicated and vary, when you're looking after someone who's got an illness or got a mental health problem, it's not the same each day, it varies. And your freedom to do other things will vary. But the way the state organizes itself is just shambolic, really. And I want to underline this because my last comes from an individual family sort of bottom-up basis, which the state really has a problem dealing with. And all I'm wanting the state is to reorganize itself so it understands in a very non-statist way how to help real people. Enable real people to give the love that they want to give. And at the moment, it both prevents that, doesn't help that anywhere near as much as it could do, and then prevents them contributing to society. I mean, the whole thing's just nuts, right? That's why the Treasury officials had to be taken on.
In the category of the whole thing is just nuts, I want to come to the 100,000 people, the 100,000 vacancies that are in our care system, and the politics of immigration, and the R word, reform, not the idea, the party. So firstly, I want to just get your sense of, is there a way, or should there be a way, to address this question via a thoughtful, far-sighted, inclusive, pragmatic, non-demagogic approach to immigration? Is there a way that we can fill those 100,000 spaces by bringing people from other countries who have the time, the talent, the energy, and the desire to care for people?
Well, let me start by saying I celebrate the work done by people who've come from abroad to help people in this country, and it should be celebrated and not demonized. However, I wouldn't necessarily reach for visas for two reasons. First of all, I'd like to pay care workers more. And at the moment, many people in this country have a choice between, do I work in a care home, or do I work in a supermarket or an Amazon warehouse? Do I get the minimum wage in a care home or the minimum wage in a supermarket? And they go for the supermarket because the hours are more sociable. It's not so challenging. So we don't reward paid care as well. So that's separate from family care. We don't reward paid care properly. And I think we ought to. I think we should value it more. And when you do, you get lower turnover, you get higher skilled people, you get into a virtuous circle. So first of all, let's try and attract people who live in this country into care, because it's a wonderful profession and needs to be valued more highly. Second thing, and this is not me, again, being against wanting to look at how we do legal immigration, but the Conservatives, in their huge wisdom, when they realised that Brexit was going to be a disaster because our wonderful European friends were saying, well, if you don't really want us here, we'll go back home, they panicked. And Boris Johnson oversaw the greatest explosion of legal immigration we have ever seen in a short period. And it's worth progressive people just focusing on that a bit. They issued, and the numbers vary a little bit, but roughly, in about 3 years, they issued about 400,000 visas for health and social care. And they did it almost on an industrial basis. It was uncontrolled. It was unsupervised. And guess what? A lot of people came here in everything from modern slavery conditions to, frankly, fraudulent conditions. Because if we'd issued 400,000 health and social care visas, we wouldn't have those vacancies now, would we? So they mismanaged immigration and played into Farage's hands. So I'm not going to play into Farage's hands. I'm going to talk about care reform in a way which doesn't prevent him spreading his hate and division and his lies. So I want to start by talking about paying care workers more and about valuing care workers more. And by the way, that's quite a lot of immigrant population within that, I'm delighted to say. If you want to challenge me on that, but I generally think we have to play smart. Nigel Farage is a danger to our country in a most profound way. all the values we're talking about, not just care, but all liberal progressive values are on the ballot paper. If he gets his, for him, he wants to turn them all around. I think we have to be as smart as we can in our communication and in our thinking.
I'm going to invite you to expand on that a little bit. I mean, one of the big applause lines in your convention speech was, "Don't let Donald Trump's America become Nigel Farage's Britain." And you sort of listed a litany of ways in which that might happen. You're a party which has had a proud track record on Europe, and are calling for a kind of more imaginative approach to going back into Europe and a single market and other things. But firstly, how significant, you sit in the heart of Westminster, how significant a threat do you think reform is? And I say this, you have, last time I checked, 72 MPs. They have 4. I'm pretty sure that the media coverage of reform outstrips the coverage of the Liberal Democrats by about 1,000 to 1. So it's very interesting how asymmetrically effective this party is at gaining attention. And it comes back to where I started, where the politics of demagoguery and hate and division is unfortunately more effective. And I wonder, politics, you've got to win in politics. And so I wonder whether the kind of squishy, technocratic, liberal center needs to start getting a little bit more robust about dealing with this threat in its terms, and how you're doing that.
Couldn't agree more. We've certainly gone somewhere along that line. We need to go further. But it's partly waking people up to the scale of the threat, because I think people either don't think he's going to win, but I say, well, what about Brexit? What about Boris Johnson becoming our Prime Minister? What about Donald Trump 2 victories? If those can happen, Farage can win. So we should take that seriously. And given he's got his own TV channel with GB News, his mate Elon Musk gives him the social platform, and all the right-wing papers that you support the Tories are now playing footsie with Nigel Farage. This is deadly serious. And so we've begun to change the way we do things. And this gives me a chance to explain why I wore a wetsuit for a lot of the last general election campaign. Because we had to grab attention, because you're right, they weren't looking at us. So we had to get the cameras there. And doing little things like falling off a paddleboard or bungee jumping, got the cameras there, and enabled me to then talk about Liberal Democrat values and policies. Indeed, I think as a leader of the Lib Dems, I spoke more about it than any of my immediate predecessors, because the cameras were there and weren't ignoring us. And although people say you're mad to do these stunts, I just think they're wrong. They are working, and not only do they get us attention, but they're cutting through to young people. On TikTok, these work really, really well. YouGov showed that our support between 18 and 24-year-olds is nearly 3 times reform support, although the BBC haven't reported that, but it's true. So doing this sort of stuff is important. And also, it's in a more profound way, and I think this for all people who want to defeat Farage and have a more progressive agenda, one's got to remember the importance of emotion in politics. So my party loves a good bit of analysis and evidence. They like a good debate about reason and what is the right thing to do. And we obviously come up with the right answers all the time, of course we do. And then we say, eat your vegetables. It's not good politics. Yes, you have to have the reason, the argument, the analysis, and good policies. Of course you do. But if you're only talking to that, you're losing most of the population who vote with that. And what the right are doing is they're appealing to fear, anxiety, they're appealing to prejudice, and not for everybody, of course, but for some people, it works. That's the emotion that they're responding to, particularly because they're angry and upset about their lives, that their wages haven't gone up enough. They feel that the economy hasn't been growing, that they've got rubbish housing or whatever it is. And so someone who's saying, they're to blame for your problems, it's been really powerful. So how do you respond to that? I think you respond to it by understanding that emotion is powerful, but use other emotions. So making people laugh is important, making people smile. Also, back to care, we did a party election broadcast, which made people cry, telling my story. And what we were trying to do was obviously talk about care, tell people that I'm not just a boring old white old dude in a suit, but actually I have a personality. And in doing so, tried to make people smile and actually realise that people like me get them, understand them, and want to be on their side. And so whether it's making people laugh or making people cry, I think emotion is really important. I think those of us who are trying to stop reform, who want a liberal small L agenda, have got to get emotional.
So I want to come to, because there's a sort of metaphor that I'm going to spend a bit of time trying to get out of my mind, which is there's one kind of way that you grab social media on the right, which is by demonizing the other and puffing up small boats to be a greater threat than they are. Then our counter to that is stunts and wetsuits. And it's sort of like once you put your face in your hands to say that we live in a world where really smart, considerably talented people are needing to grab the limelight through these tactics because of the new ways that we communicate with each other. And fair enough, and hats off to you for being inventive and not just giving up in that regard. But I want to sort of come to the sort of substantive policy issue, which I think the centre, and it relates to care in both senses. The core thing about the UK is that it will not be able to afford to be the generous nation it needs to be and the caring nation it needs to be unless its economy starts growing. And it seems to me that the one Achilles heel of reform is that it doesn't really have a clue about how to grow an economy. It's a good way of scaring people, but it doesn't have a clue about how to grow an economy. Which then flips the argument is, who does have a clue about growing the economy, but growing the economy in the bottom up or in a way that's more inclusive, that isn't the kind of mode that we've seen right now, which is the incredible concentration of wealth at the top. And you're a trained economist, so use emotion and simple facts to sort of set out the case for a Lib Dem approach to growth that is fair and inclusive in ways that can counter it's brown people's fault coming across in boats. Like how, because you've got to be pretty compelling to talk about technocratic stuff to win. But unless we do that, we are going to lose elections time and time again.
Good challenge, because I think the next election is going to be on 3 issues. It's going to be on health and care, immigration, and the economy. He's going to lose on health and care, and we're going to win. Immigration, I think we've got the sensible policies, but he is speaking to some people's fears, I regret to say. We'll challenge him, but he's going to win with some people on that. The economy is where the battle is at. The economy really goes down to 2 different approaches to it. One is what voters are worried about most of all, and then linked to that, what serious economic policy would make a big difference as well. So what voters tend to care about at the moment, and frankly for years, is costs of living, is the money in their pocket. And the cost of living crisis, which every spokesperson, every party trots out the whole time, is a real thing. It is a massive thing for people. And there's no easy solution. Of course there isn't. But if you're trying to take him on, you need to work out where you go in that space. And I want to go into that space in energy bills. So energy bills, they may not be the biggest part of people's expenditure, which is always housing. They're still a big part and a growing part and a more worrying part. And we've seen that over the last few years, and I think it will be the case. And Farage is going to say, oh, it's all these renewables. They're putting up your bills, and what we want is a nice bit of gas. Let's frack for gas, and your bills will go down. That's what he's saying. And of course, he's utterly, completely wrong. Fracking for gas, I don't think will be as popular as he thinks it is in the countryside of our wonderful country. So he's going to struggle there. I think he'll struggle to make the case that his mate Vladimir Putin should be trusted to give us gas. He's also going to struggle because gas is the cause of high prices and volatile prices. So people's energy bills are high, primarily because gas prices are high. Because what happens in electricity markets, and I'll try not to be too geeky at this point, is the price of electricity every half hour is set by the last power station that comes on the bars that is giving its electrons over. And that, for 99% of the time, the last few years, has been gas power stations. And they're more expensive. So it's gas is the problem. If we could boost more renewables, and indeed nuclear, but low carbon, we could push gas off the system, at least for most of the time. It'll be there, say, 10% or 50% of the time maybe. But it wouldn't be there, and then bills would fall dramatically. In other countries that have done more renewable deployment, they've even seen zero prices, negative prices for electricity because of renewables. So I could not be more certain that the renewable energy installation, low carbon agenda will deliver lower bills. It's just factually the case. And so what we have to do is to try to get that argument over, but obviously with that emotional way as well. So we've got to get people that they're struggling with their bills. We've got to have concrete ways, and particularly ways where we're having a head-to-head with him and calling him out. So that's one aspect. There's a second, then I will shut up. So cost of living, because that's what people really care about. Well, if you knock on people's doors, and I do, that's what they care about. You do need to have a more sophisticated macroeconomic approach, right? And we would start with Europe, unashamedly, and we'd use that politically. He caused the Brexit problems, and everyone knows we want to put Brexit round his neck. He did it, along with his mate Boris, supported by Vlad. We want to rebuild the relationship, because we think if you live in a street called Europe, you should get on better with your neighbours and trade with them, because that's the most efficient way of doing it. And I think I think the Remain campaign failed to get that over. It's blooming obvious, isn't it, that you trade more with people near you. The economic facts over centuries prove that's the case. So building back and calling him out on that macro stance and showing that if we had a customs union with the EU or moved back towards a single market, we'd lower prices in the shops, lower cost of business, expand the economy, that is beyond credible.
So that's where, of your three buckets, and I like that formulation of the three terrains where the next election is going to be fought. The cost of living crisis, to the extent that it intersects with Europe, then bleeds into immigration. And I'd like to put to you that even the way I'm fully on board with the first 2 points, but the way that you described immigration, which is they're probably going to win, we'll try and counter it, may be part of the problem, and maybe hear your response, which is to say, unless there is, and I think international data shows this, a full-throated defense of the benefits of immigration, that immigration lifts the economy, immigrants commit fewer crimes, pay more in taxes than they use in services, create more businesses, make our societies more diverse, make our football teams win, all of these things, unless you sort of make a full-throated defense of it, as opposed to, well, it's a problem, but I'm not prepared to be as racist as you in describing the problem, you lose the argument. And in fact, there needs to be a party, and I'm hoping it will be yours, that actually takes the premise and says, I reject your premise that immigration's a problem. It's actually historically successful societies are porous and welcome people in, and they benefit us, not them. They benefit us bringing those people in. Isn't there a case for that?
Well, we do that, and that is who we are. But there is a short-term issue, and I have to come, because this is the context that people see it. There was a dramatic increase in immigration in the last few years of the Conservative government. I mean, dramatic. And it was almost all legal. It wasn't the small boats, as you say. It was almost all legal with these massive expansion of visas. And they did it because they worried about the negative effects of Brexit they'd introduced. So the experience of people's lives is that there has been a big increase in immigrant populations. And while that will settle down and will ultimately be great for the economy, that is clearly the case, that's not where people are at the moment. So I welcome you developing narratives to get over to people, and we try to do that in our way. All I am I'm being realistic about the ability of Farage with his mates in the media, his mates in the Conservative Party, to make this the issue in a way which is negative. Now, absolutely we have to call people out on that, but you also have to understand the experience of people, and also that they've got that, it's not often not their experience actually, it's what they're reading and seeing. Reading the great publications like the Daily Mail or seeing it on X, and they're getting a completely distorted view, and that has to be challenged. And let me just, if I may, because we're on the media, make a little point about the media. The BBC, frankly, have got to get their act together. We've been running a campaign called Balance the BBC, because as a public service broadcaster, not only have they been giving reform too much airtime, in my view, they've not been scrutinising them properly. They've begun to change it a little bit recently, but it's, should have happened a lot earlier. And they're not giving airtime to views about people wanting to talk about care to reform our health service, or about getting better, closer to Europe to boost our economy, or our position on Gaza over the last few year or so, or our opposition to Trump. We're the only party calling out Donald Trump on a regular basis, but apparently that's not newsworthy, which I don't know what counts as newsworthy if you're not doing that. So the BBC itself is not actually abiding by its royal charter, and those of us who support the BBC, because we're a strong supporter of the BBC, have to call it out when it behaves like that. And I've said to some senior BBC people, if they get elected, you're finished, you're gone. Look at what Trump is doing to media in America, and that they need to wake up. We've also got to get much tougher with the social media barons. I particularly have targeted Elon Musk, and I'm delighted to continue to target him because I think he has behaved outrageously, and I'm absolutely convinced that his platform X is breaking the law on a daily basis.
I want to ask a final question before we turn over to the audience, and that's another sort of Venn diagram intersection between the care economy and cost of living, which is food. And you mention this in your book, and Tim Jackson's really remarkable work about the extraordinary costs of bad food on our population and on our health systems. And it seems to me that there's a kind of triple win here, that if you could solve how to make food more affordable, how to make food healthier, and how to make food more sustainable, you could win on all three counts, and you could improve on all three of those social indicators in ways that would be politically salient but socially really beneficial. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on food, care, sustainability, cost of living.
Oh gosh. That's a large agenda. I mean, let me just do it on food, if I may. I'm happy to. We've still touched on the others, and I'm going to go towards it in a really odd way. But it's helping you potentially help me, but also help you explain how we have to do things. Because if we're trying to win and beat these people, so at the last election, when we talked about the environment in all the constituencies we thought we could win, we talked about sewage in people's local rivers and lakes and in the sea. And we talked about sewage because we found out that moved people's voting intentions, particularly people who were annoyed with the Conservative government, who'd never voted Liberal Democrat, and then they found out their MP had voted to allow the water companies to do that. They got pretty cross, and they were prepared to move their vote. If we talked to them about climate change, it was less of a vote mover. So we talked a lot about sewage, and I had more pictures of myself in Wellingtons in rivers than I ever thought I would. So this does come onto food, honestly. I think food is definitely a big political issue, and I've been arguing it within my party for some time, and we need to come up with some ideas about how to campaign and get it emotional and effective enough for it to be a vote switcher. So that's my test for you who've got great ideas on food. We've got loads of policies on food. Tim Farron, our DEFRA spokesperson, has got lots of ideas. We've got little groups who talk about food and follow all the people who are writing brilliantly on it. That's not the challenge. We can sign up to all that stuff. The challenge is using it as an electoral tool to switch people away from Conservatives or Reform to realise that actually other people get them. I think the biggest way is the cost of food. And if you look at the food inflation in this country, yes, food inflation is going up everywhere. It's going up faster in the UK. That's partly because some of the more misguided policies of the current government, but it's also to do with Brexit, and it's a number of other areas. And I think while I would like to talk about healthy food as well, and sustainable food as well, I think if we can show that, we've got a process to get people's energy bills down and their food bills down, and the other lot would keep them high, then I think we beat them.
I can't resist giving a sidebar shout out to Charles Watson and River Action, who founding members of the club and have done perhaps the most effective social media work and campaigning work on sewage and rivers, and have totally taken an issue which can be abstract and water companies and industrial chicken farming and made it about what people care about. And I think if you pull sewage out of rivers, you get to industrial chicken farming quite quickly. You also get to the way we need to reform our flood defenses and think about building resilience and adaptation. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'm going to let you do a final shout out because, notwithstanding my jibe about wetsuits, you released a Christmas single. And so you've got to tell these people about your Christmas single.
Well, it's too late to get me to number one. I think George Michael got there anyway. No, it was called Love Is Enough. And actually, we started off thinking about releasing me singing aged 12 or 13, because I was a chorister and had a high voice. And it was particularly pertinent because the widow of my former choir master sent me this old-fashioned cassette, which we digitalised, which had me singing The Hollow in the Ivy and In the Bleak Midwinter. And it would have been the last time my mum had gone to church to see me sing. So it would have been quite a poignant record, but it wasn't that interesting, no one would have bought it. So we thought it was a pretty bad idea, ultimately. But we got together with the Bath Philharmonia Choir and their Young Carers Choir, because the Bath Philharmonia Orchestra do work with young carers, and we'd been to see them on a visit, and we thought, let's go and talk to them. And they had written a sort of song-stroke carol called Love Is Enough. And it was written by 6 young carers, and they'd done a few performances of it, and we thought, why don't we release that? So it's Bath Philharmonia Orchestra and the Young Carers Choir with Ed Davey. And I didn't do much singing as a soloist, very wisely, but we released this single, Love Is Enough. And it talks about caring from a young carer's perspective. And it was all part of the book and other things to try to keep care in the spotlight. Because whether it's the Treasury or the government or the opposition, they don't want to talk about this issue. They just don't talk about it. And I keep raising it at PMQ after PMQ. I've written a book. I've done the Christmas single. I'll do anything. I'm just trying to get this subject treated seriously.
So I think we've got to set ourselves a collective test here as, can we make that sufficiently viral that it lands up on the desk of Kendrick Lamar and he samples it in some of his new release and it becomes a kind of Super Bowl hit. So that's our collective goal.
That's a test.
Ed Davey, thank you so much for a really wonderful conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand over to members of the audience to ask questions. And please, madam.
I want to ask a question. When you say about the emotion...
Sorry, there's a microphone, yeah.
When you
I'm
say
sorry,
about,
can I just say, can we do questions, not speeches,
yes,
please?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
I just want to make a question. How can you make something to create accountability? Because all the promises that Farage is doing, as well as Boris Johnson did, they never fulfill what they promised to the public, why they voted for them. So how can something can be an accountability for people that promise, because the lies also people want to believe, and that's the way they vote for.
With Farage, I don't want to have to hold him to account as a government. I want to stop him becoming a government. And that's how we hold him to account as an opposition leader. And we have to show, even before he's put his bad policies in place, what they'd be like. Which is why I framed the argument against him as, do you want Trump's America to be Farage's Britain? What I'm saying in that framing is that if you vote for Nigel Farage, you'll get Donald Trump. You'll get Donald Trump's policies in America. You'll get fracking. You'll get private healthcare. You'll get a reduction in gun control. All the things that Donald Trump is all about, and you'll get them here. And that's the way to hold him to account and stop him ever getting into power, which is what we've got to do. If he gets his hands on power, we're in real trouble.
Yep. So,
hi Ed, thanks for being here. We've heard a lot about reform, but I'd love to hear your view on Zach and the Green Party. Now, historically, I've been a Lib Dem voter, but their policies are quite strong on immigration and inequality. So I'd like to hear your view on the Greens.
I think it's very early days to pass judgment on him. I've got I know a lot of Green Party people who are a bit worried about where he's taking the Green Party, actually. He's getting a lot of attention. That's no doubt about that. My worry is if you get attention by being really controversial, sometimes that may not be great politics. You need to take people with you. Farage gets lots of attention by being controversial. That doesn't mean that some of the things he's saying we don't have some sympathy with, right? That's Zach Polansky, by the way, not Nigel Farage. But I've been surprised by how little he's talked about the environment. I mean, it's been extraordinary, actually. I would have thought the Green Party leader would have wanted to talk about the environment. I'm happy to talk about it every single day, if you like. He does seem to be positioning the Green Party, and I think he's almost said this, on the far left of British politics, taking on your party and the Corbynistas, and I suspect that's why they're growing in membership. They're taking people who joined the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn and have left the Labour Party since Jeremy Corbyn left. So I don't know the details. I don't want to make accusations, but I'm not. There may be threads that we agree with him on. There's a lot that I don't agree with him on, and I think going to the left is not the right thing for our country, and I think it has the danger of playing into other people's hands. I think we've got to really be smart in the way we take on Farage, and let me put this in a way that might surprise you. We need to persuade people who used to vote Conservative to vote, in my case, Liberal Democrat. And I see that as a moral responsibility. Because there's a lot of former Conservative voters who were pro-European, One Nation, I'd even call them liberal Tories. They wouldn't agree with me on everything, but they probably have a lot more in common with the Liberal Democrats than they do with the Reform Party. We have to give them a home at the next election. We have to give them a home. And you don't do that by going off to the left. And to defeat Farage, and indeed the Conservative Party, you need a party of, I would call the liberal centre, the progressive centre, the radical centre, who they could feel comfortable with. And I think we can be that. We're comfortable about talking about decency, tolerance, the rule of law, classic British values. And so we have to talk to that group of people. And if we don't, they'll either not vote at all, or they'll, as we get near the election, we'll go, well, we've got to vote for reform. And what Farage will do in the 6 months before election, he'll move to be more moderate, to attract those very people. So politics is a deadly serious game. It's never been more frightening. You have to think deeply about what he's going to do. I know this may sound a long way from your question, but I have a responsibility as the leader of my party to make sure that not only we win and we beat Reform and beat the Conservative Party, but we stay true to our values. And that is what we're going to do.
I'm going to jump in on that just because the question about inequality, the wealth tax is what he's getting virality on, and he may not be talking about environment, but he's talking about inequality. And if the inequality is the problem, the solution in his making is a wealth tax. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, inequality comes in many guises. I'll tell you the biggest attack on inequality is to treat carers better. Carers amongst the poorest people in society, because they lose income. And it tends to be more women than men, shock horror. So there's a gender equality issue there. And the reason I mention that is that's a real positive way of trying to tackle inequality. One of the other big ways is social housing. In my party, we have a very strong set of proposals for council housing. I met my wife on a Liberal Democrat housing policy working group in 2003. Some people say I should get out a bit more. She's now the housing portfolio holder in Kingston Council, and we're building the largest council house programme for over 40 years. Completely changing the lives of some of the poorest and most vulnerable people in our area. And we're leading the way. There's a few other councils doing that in London now. So I'm interested in solutions. You told me this is a solution thing. Wealth taxes don't have a great record in other countries. Don't have a great record at all. Go see the evidence. I think helping carers, getting social housing right, doing what we did on tax. Our policy, which we delivered in the coalition, was to get the lowest paid out of income tax. So all the tax cuts we put forward were on the lowest earners. And that's a positive sum game, isn't it? Where you're helping people who are struggling by making sure that they're paying less in tax, giving a hand up, as well as dealing with other people who have a real experience of poverty. So, I mean, whether Zach would agree on that, I don't know, but that's certainly how we would approach the massive problem of inequality.
Surely the idea of carers is going to be very soon a thing of the past with AI. So when do you think, and do you think, AI will just cause a complete shift in what you're talking about?
I couldn't disagree more. Could not disagree more. In my book, I actually deal with that in a few pages, where I quote people who are really into robotics and AI, who acknowledge that even the most advanced robots will not really be able to deliver what another human being can deliver. That's not to say they can't help, by the way, and in the book I accept that technology has a role to play in innovation, but it's not going to exclude the human touch. I mean, I don't know if my mother would have preferred a robot or me. I'm pretty sure she'd prefer me. My son, I think he'd prefer me to a robot. And I think when you're dealing with real relationships, human beings are the best at it. And I'm very, very, very skeptical of AI or robots being able to deliver the care revolution that we need.
That's all good. I'm so sorry. Ed has got parliamentary business to attend to and books to sign. So what we're going to do is thank him very, very much for his wonderful contribution. And he will be signing books at this table over here in rapid machine gun style. And thank you so much. Thank you.